Could the Toronto Maple Leafs and Mitch Marner be closing in on the richest NHL bridge deal we've ever seen? We'll discuss all the latest and whether or not they can keep Jake Gardiner as well, coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. Now we do have some more information today on the Mitch Marner contract negotiations with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, we're full back here into September now. Of course, today we saw all the major hockey media insiders making appearances today on TSN, including Bob McKenzie, Pierre LeBrun, Darren Dreger, etc. So there's lots of information being discussed. According to Darren Dreger, he believes that the Leafs and the Marner camp might be closing in on a 3-year contract at approximately $9.5 million. Now, we discussed yesterday and some other videos throughout the summer that it looks as though the Leafs and Marner were just way too far apart on a longer term contract. And it also seems to be a trend here that many of the RFAs, especially in the forward group, they want shorter term deals to get themselves to unrestricted free agency as soon as possible. Many of them coveting that 5-year contract coming out of their entry level deal, which takes them directly to being an unrestricted free agent for their next contract. Obviously, they want to cash in, make as much money as they can, and it does seem as though many of them are more interested in exploring free agency than they have been in the past. So I guess we will see how that works out and if any of these guys actually go with either shorter term bridge deals or the longer term deals. But it doesn't look as though many of these players are interested in the long term deals, but the teams really are. They prefer the long term deals. It helps them manage their salary cap better. It certainly avoids them having to pay bigger raises as these players continue to improve, as the salary cap increases. So obviously from a business perspective, the longer term deal makes more sense. But from the player's perspective, being able to cash in over and over as the salary cap increases, many prefer that shorter term contract. At least that's the current trend right now. Of course, you can have an argument there that the longer term contract benefits them as well because of job security. And you never know what can happen when it comes to injuries or maybe their play will decline. It's really hard to say. But should the Maple Leafs explore this 3-year deal at $9.5 million, according to the information that's coming out today from TSN and Darren Dreger on Leafs Lunch, it does look as though that there is an offer on the table. And many believe that something similar to that at least is what's going to end up actually taking place for the Mitch Marner contract. Now, let's take a quick look at the overall cap situation from the Leafs, courtesy of CapFriendly.com. You will see here that they have, right now, their total cap hit is $84.397 million, which puts them over the cap by $2.889 million. Now, currently, they also have 4 guys who qualify to go on long-term injury reserve, including guys like Nathan Horton and David Clarkson, who will never play again. Those 2 contracts themselves add up to over $10 million. But they also have forward Zach Hyman, who's recovering from an ACL surgery, and they also have Travis Dermott, who had a shoulder situation that he had to deal with over the offseason. And likely, neither of those guys are ready to start the season and could be put on LTIR, at least on a shorter-term basis. But to start the season on opening night, those 4 contracts would add up to $13.66 million. So given the fact that they're already over by 2.8, that gives them approximately close to $11 million or so to work with. Now, of course, you also have to factor in that right now, the players being factored into that total cap hit for the Leafs includes 13 forwards. So 1 forward could either be moved out, traded, demoted, etc. to create some extra space that way. They have a number of players, making between $700,000 to $900,000. So likely will be one of those guys. And they could also consider moving out a defenseman as well, because they do have more than enough D on there. So somebody could either be put through waivers, buried in the minors, or possibly traded as well to maybe create a little bit extra. I don't think they're going to create a whole lot of extra space barring some kind of major move, but either way they could generate probably another $1.5 to $1.8 million or something to that effect without making anything too drastic of a transaction involving another NHL club. So obviously a Mitch Marner contract at $9.5 million would be incredibly high, really, if you think about the fact that many of the other top players around the league, like Nikita Kucherov, for example, signed for far, far less, only not that long ago. The $9.5 million in 3 years is a lot of money. I mean, you see guys like Mark Stone, who recently is making similar type money as well, but he signed for an 8-year contract. There's a big difference there. He's going to be making that same amount of money for the next 8 years compared to 3. So obviously that works better longer term for the team. Mark Stone could continue to improve his numbers as well and become an even more productive player. The salary cap could go up, and in a few years' time, that very well might look like a bargain contract depending on what everybody else around the NHL is making. But Mitch Marner at $9.5 million over a 3-year term, I know many fans, at least from what I've seen on social media today, don't seem to be overly fond of that idea and think it's a gross overpayment. So I'd love to hear what you think down in the comment section. If the Leafs and Marner end up settling on a bridge contract for 3 years at $9.5 million, what do you think of that? Obviously, that does allow them a little bit of more cap flexibility than paying him $10 or $11 million on a longer term deal. But at the same time, they're going to have this whole fiasco come up again in 3 years' time. He'd still be an RFA, but he would have arbitration rights at that point. So they likely wouldn't have this drawn out and dragging on here quite so long. But he could end up doing another short-term contract. Maybe they sign him longer term at that point when that contract expires. It's really difficult to say, but being that he'd have arbitration rights at least, we wouldn't have to necessarily expect this to be drug on all summer and have a potential holding out type of situation that they're faced with now if a contract does not reach here very soon. Now, with all that said, if this contract amount appears to be accurate, would the Maple Leafs also be able to retain Jake Gardiner? Now, we've discussed Jake Gardiner on numerous occasions through this offseason as well. Now, I do find it somewhat surprising that we're now into September and unrestricted free agent defenseman Jake Gardiner remains unsigned. I mean, heading into free agency, I personally regarded Gardiner as probably the top unrestricted free agent defenseman on the market, and the fact that he doesn't have a contract of any kind just seems weird, and I do believe that many of what the NHL insiders have said that he has a handshake agreement in place with a team does make a lot of sense, because I just can't imagine that he would be this far into the offseason without have something in place. But obviously, that team that he's got the agreement with needs to make other moves in order to get him signed. And if it is Toronto, obviously getting Marner signed first, it takes top priority, see what's left over, figure out what they can work on, maybe tweak the rest of the roster like I've indicated here, and try to see if they can come up with enough cap flexibility to bring him in. I mean, it's hard to say what kind of contract Gardiner would get from the Maple Leafs. He'd have to probably play on a 1-year term, maybe for $2 or $3 million is probably all he would be able to get, I would think, barring a bigger move out of Toronto. And I just don't see them making a significant move to bring him back. I do think they'd have interest to have him on the blue line. I could see them moving out another blue liner to make room for him. But with the overall cap situation, I just don't think it's going to be anything too crazy, too significant. It's likely going to be less money than he had before. And the only thing that really makes sense, the reason why he would want to do that, would be just he just loves playing in Toronto that much. That he just doesn't want to leave and doesn't care if he makes less money. Ultimately, the blue line in Toronto will look likely different again after the coming season. They do have a lot of unrestricted free agents and some restricted free agents on that blue line. The only real significant piece under contract longer term is Morgan Riley. So perhaps the Leafs could get Gardiner on a 1-year contract, and then depending on what else they do on the blue line, consider extending him to a more lucrative contract beyond that after the coming year. I mean, it will be tough to keep guys like Jake Muzzin and Tyson Barrie. So they're in kind of in win now mode to see what they can do before some of these guys need too many bigger raises that they can't keep everybody in the fold, since many of their young forwards are eating up such a large chunk of their salary cap situation. But I guess we will see if Jake Gardiner is a possibility or not. However, the biggest news for today is the fact that the NHL insiders seem to think that there's a 3-year contract around $9.5 million that's on the table that will likely be signed soon enough before training camp starts, that they're just too far apart on a long-term deal, and that they appear to be closing in on this short-term bridge contract. So, of course, as always, want to know your thoughts and opinions on the possibility of this Marner contract. If this information is accurate from Darren Dreger and what's being discussed by the NHL insiders, do you feel this contract is fair? Do you think it's a big overpayment? I know there seems to be a wide variety of opinions out there, so I'd love to hear what yours is, and we can discuss further down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.